Stuka Joe here. Today we're going to take a look at this game. Navíos de Línea, Ships of the Line. This is volume 2 that will be published later this year by Trafalgar Editions. Trafalgar already produced volume 1, which included the Battle of Trafalgar. And this is a game system that simulates naval engagements during the years 1740 to 1815. And this is volume 2, and it brings 4 scenarios. The Battle of Abu Qir Bay, also known as the Battle of the Nile, fought in 1798. There's also a scenario for the Battle of Algeciras Bay in 1801. There's also a section on super frigates with engagements by the Constitution in 1812, and also the Battle of Lake Erie in 1813. The game includes hulls and sails which you assemble into ships, and there are 14 red ships which represent the British in all the scenarios, and there are 13 blue ships which represent the French and the Americans in the scenarios included. This game uses miniatures rules, so there are no spaces on the boards, and the boards are rectangular shaped, and some boards only contain the depiction of sea. The others contain landmasses, and the printed landmasses on the board are used for the Battle of the Nile scenario. The game also includes overlays to be placed on the map in order to play the Algeciras Bay scenario. The game also includes a fire range template, which you use to fire on enemy ships, either at point blank, normal, or long range. The game also includes cardboard markers to denote certain ship statuses, as well as rectangular pieces that measure 2 centimeters. Each such piece represents a unit of movement, and these are used in order to trace movement paths and calculate firing ranges. And bear in mind that this game has 2 modalities, a basic game and also an advanced game. We will go through the rules of the basic game. Here we can see the instruction for the scenario of the Constitution versus the Guerrier, and we see that the wind is blowing from the north, and there are 9 units of measurement markers between both ships. And here you see the ship's starting positions. Now we remove the markers. First phase is the initiative phase, and we roll 1d6 for each side, and in this scenario the American player adds 1 to his roll. The Americans roll a 5 modified to a 6, the British a 1, so the Americans have the initiative. Player with the initiative fires first, and in this game, after both players fire, then the effects of the fire are implemented, so fire is considered simultaneous. So there's no firing here because both ships are well out of range. So now we go to movement, and the player that doesn't have the initiative has to move first, so that is the British. And the British are upwind. They only have 25% of their movement allowance available because of the wind direction. So the British will just move forward 1 unit of measurement. We remove the marker, and that's the end of the British movement. The Americans are also facing almost the wind in front. They also have 25%, but they will just turn for that 1 movement unit. And that concludes the American movement. Now we would go to the crew phase, but there are no crew actions at this time. Both sides have both port and starboard side guns loaded. So we go now to the next turn, and we roll for initiative. The American rolls a 3 modified to a 4. The British roll a 4, so they are tied, and the British win all ties. So the British have the initiative. There will be no fire because both ships are out of range. So the Americans, who don't have the initiative, have to move first. Because of the direction of the wind, the Americans have their full movement allowance of 4. This is in sailing what I think is called broad reach. So the Americans will move forward 4 units of movement with no turns exceeding 45 degrees. And after moving so, we remove the unit of measurement markers. And now it's the British turn to move. And they only have 1 unit of movement. So the British want to place the Americans on their firing range. But with just 1 unit of movement, they have to choose between moving or turning more than 45 degrees. If they move, they cannot turn more than 45 degrees, so they will move as shown here. And we remove the marker. And now we go to the crew phase. There is no actions by any of the crew, so we finish turn 2. Now we go to turn 3. And we roll for initiative. And just to give you an indication of what the wind direction is, place the arrow as so. And now we roll 1d6 for each side. The Americans roll a 4 modified to a 5, and they beat the British. The initiative die roll. So the Americans will have the initiative, and the British will be moving second. But before we move, we have to check for combat. And let's see if the ships are within range. We placed a template projecting from the Constitution, and you see there that the British ship is out of range. So there will be no combat phase. We go to the movement phase, and the British move first. British know that the Americans will have 3 units of movement, so they will not move forward, but turn. And that concludes the British movement phase. Now the Americans move. They have 3 units of movement. Americans simply move forward. They will not execute any turn exceeding 45 degrees. There are no crew actions, so now we go to turn number 4. We roll for initiative. And again, the Americans win the initiative. So that means that we go now to the fire phase. And the initiative side, which is the Americans, conduct fire first. And you can see here that the American ship will not be in the field of fire of the Guerrier. However, the Guerrier is in the field of fire of the American ship. And just to measure distance, it is in the normal zone. You see there, it says -1 die. So the Constitution, as shown here in its card, has a total of 30 guns, and that produces 3 dice rolled. And we subtract 1 for normal range, so Constitution will roll 2 dice. Here we see the tables, and as it reads there, the combat procedure, we roll as many 6-sided dice as appropriate for the ship class. The ship class has 3, but -1 for the range, so we roll 2, and it will score hits on 5s and 6s unless it is point-blank range, in which hits will be scored on 4 to 6. So we roll 2d6, a 3 and a 6, and the 6 is a hit. And for each hit, we roll on the combat table 1 die. And all the results are going to be hull damage unless we roll a 6, which is critical damage. So we roll 1d6, and the result is a 1 point of hull damage. The Guerrier has 9 hull points, and now it has 1 less, 8. And if it reaches 3 or less, then there is an imminent possibility that it will sink. That is the combat phase. Now we go to the movement phase, and the British, which do not have the initiative, have to move first. Because of the wind direction, the British have 4 movement points. Because of the inertia rule, the first movement point has to be used to move forward, And then the other movement point is a forward move with a slight turn but not exceeding 45 degrees. Then a 45 or more degree turn and the fourth point of movement. So the British end up in this position. The Americans also have 4 units of movement. So the Americans, the first unit of movement has to be forward, then they will turn more than 45 degrees, so that's the second unit of movement. And the third unit of movement will be used to reach this position here, and the fourth unit of movement will be not used to represent the ship slowing down. That's the end of the movement phase. Now to the crew phase, but there are no crew actions. Now we go to turn 5. And we roll for initiative. This time, the Americans roll a 5 modified to a 6, and the British also roll a 6, and because the rolls are tied, the British have the initiative. And the British cannot fire because the American vessel is not within their firing range, so the Americans do fire, and as you can see here, this is point blank range. The Constitution has a 3 rating, meaning that it rolls 3 dice, and at point blank range, no dice are deducted. And rolls of 4 or more are hits, so we roll 3d6. And unfortunately for the Americans, all are misses. So now we go to the movement phase, and the Americans move first. And they are beating against the wind. They only have 1 unit of movement. So the Americans move forward, as shown. Now it's the British turn. They have 4 units of movement. The first movement has to be forward because of the inertia rule, then a turn for a second point of movement, another movement forward, and a last movement forward for the 4 units of movement. That's the end of movement. Now we go to the 6th turn and we roll for initiative. And this time the Americans have a modified 5 and the British a 1, so the Americans have the initiative and they will fire first if they can. So the Americans have the initiative, they would go first, but the Guerrier is not in its field of fire. So now it's the British who go next, and if we place the template like this, we note that the American ship is at point blank range. Here we see the Guerrier's card. It has a fire rating of 2, so 2 dice are rolled. And because it is at point blank range, any roll of 4 or more will be a hit. And the British roll a 1 and a 4, so they score 1 hit. And we roll on the combat table to see if there's any critical damage. And the roll is a 6, so there is critical damage. And now we have to roll on the critical damage table. And the possible results are, with a 1 or 2, a mast falling. And each time a mast falls, the ship loses its maximum movement capacity. If it's the main central mast, it will lose 2 points. Any other of the masts, it's 1 point. Leader wounded, and if the leader had been wounded before, the leader is killed. And if a leader is wounded, we place that marker on the ship's card. If the leader is killed, we flip the marker to its backside, and a ship with its leader killed is more susceptible to surrender to the enemy. The other possible result is that the rudder is damaged, and while damaged, there is a slight possibility that the rudder can be repaired, and damaged rudder renders immobile the ship. It will drift in the direction of the wind, and it can be towed, and there are special rules for ships towing others. And then, on a 5, a fire breaks out. And on a 6, it catches the ammunition store. If there had been a fire previously breaking out on the ship, and then another critical hit causes an ammunition store hit, the ship may explode, and you roll a die to see if it does explode. So those are the possible results. So let's roll to see which one it is this time. And the roll is a 4. The rudder is damaged. And we signify that the Constitution's rudder is damaged by placing this marker here. And as a result of the rudder being damaged, the rudder lost, the ship is uncontrollable and can only be fixed with a special roll of 1 die and obtaining a 1 during the crew phase, and that will increase the crew's fatigue. So now we go to the movement phase. The Americans have the initiative, so the British go first, and the British know that the American ship can only drift. And drift will cause the ship to be moved in the direction of the wind and rotated 45 degrees until the wind is directly behind it. So the British move first, but the British only have 1 unit of movement. They will use that unit simply to turn. Now it's the Americans' turn, and they can only drift. The Constitution moves in the wind's direction and can only rotate 45 degrees. That's the end of movement. And now the Americans in the crew phase are going to try to repair that rudder. And just by attempting repair, fatigue will increase by 1. So we roll 1d6, and only on a 1 it will be repaired. And the roll is a 4. The rudder is still damaged. Now we have to assess the fatigue point on the Constitution's crew. Here we see the Constitution's card, and we keep track of crew fatigue in this row here that has the crew symbol and the exclamation mark. And now the crew has 1 point of fatigue, and when it reaches 4, it cannot conduct any other crew actions except movement or firing its cannons until the crew has rested. And that's the end of the 6th turn. So this gives you an idea of the flow of the game. This is a 1-to-1 scenario. There are scenarios where each side has multiple ships. And like in any other Age of Sail combat game, in addition to gunnery combat, like the one you saw, whenever a ship is at a distance of half a unit of movement, and here we see the unit of movement marker, it has a halfway mark here, then is when boarding attempts can be made. But first, one ship must grapple successfully the other ship. So when the 2 ships are within that half a unit of movement distance, then we determine if the ships are grappled or not. And we roll 1d6 on the grappling table. So we start by checking to see if the ships are grappled or not. So the moving player rolls 1d6 on the grappling table. You see that only on a 1 or a 2 the ships will be grappled. And let's say the result is a 2, so the ships are grappled. Now the non-moving player has the option of trying to ungrapple the ships. And for that purpose, he also rolls 1d6 on the grappling table. And we'll say that the roll is a 1 and that the ships remain grappled. Otherwise, there would be no boarding at all. So now each of the sides makes a boarding roll, and we consult the boarding rating of each of the ships. And the boarding rating is this number beneath this swords clashing symbol. So the guerrier, who is the moving party, has a boarding rating of 1, while the Constitution has a boarding rating of 2. And we consult the boarding table and roll 2d6 for each of the sides, and they have to roll the numbers shown on the appropriate column for their odds as compared to the enemy, or less. So the guerrier is attacking with 1 and the Constitution has 2, so the guerrier is facing a 1 to 2 odds. So the British have to roll 4 or less. So we roll 2d6 and the roll is a 9, so the British fail their boarding attempt. But we still have to roll for the Americans, and they have a 2-to-1 odds ratio compared to the British. So 7 or less will be successful, and here they roll a 6. So in this example, the assaulting British player failed his roll. So 2 situations can happen. If the defending player also failed, then there's no effect and both ships remain grappled. But that wasn't the case. Here, the defending player passed his roll. So the defending player manages to board the British ship and capture her. And of course, this was shown to give you an idea of the mechanics of boarding, but the guerrier with one boarding point would probably not seek to board the Constitution at all. Now let's talk about crew fatigue, because that's an important concept in the game. And you see this row of numbers here, that's where you keep track of crew fatigue, and certain actions will increase that. So if during the crew phase you decide to reload both sides of your ship, the port and starboard sides, that is going to increase crew fatigue, and you place this marker on the ship's card to denote that, and that would increase the fatigue to 1. If the ship is used, its crew, to board another ship, or is itself boarded, that also increases the fatigue level by 1. If the rudder is successfully fixed, that will also increase fatigue by 1. And note also that attempting to grapple or ungrapple with an enemy ship will also increase the fatigue by 1. So what happens if you reach the maximum level of fatigue? In the basic game it is 3, which is the highest of the yellow boxes. But if you're playing the advanced game and the crew is a veteran crew, you would have a maximum of 4 fatigue points. When the maximum fatigue level is reached, the only actions that can be undertaken are movement and firing. No other actions can be performed until the fatigue level decreases. So I've shown you how the basic game works on a 1-to-1 scenario, but the game includes multi-ship scenarios and also advanced rules. That includes rules for leaders, collisions, friendly fires, veteran crews, as well as breaking the line and different types of ammunition. So this is Navíos de Línea, Ships of the Line, Volume 2. And this game will come out later this year, published by Trafalgar Editions. I hope that this video has given you an idea of the flow of the basic game, and I'll leave you with some pictures of the setup of the Battle of the Nile scenario. So, this is Stuka Joe, signing off for now. Thanks for watching.